Good morning, everybody. Oh, so we're moving on to what is known in the Eightfold Path as right or skillful livelihood. Livelihood, yeah. And in many respects, it's a slightly less complex world in some ways back then. And it's always complicated these days to consider, I think, right livelihood without considering right living, conscious livelihood, conscious living, consciously, how are we positioning ourselves in this complex world? We can't get out of it. We can't get out of the matrix here, we're part of it. And to some extent, how does what we're doing interface with the larger world, with our society, the kinds of decisions that we make and so forth? I mean, traditionally, when in talking about right livelihood, well, I'm going to read this to you. This classic wrong livelihood for lay followers should not engage in, they get very specific, 5 types of business. Which business? Business in weapons, business in human beings, trafficking, child labor, who's making our clothes, where do we buy our clothes? I mean, things like that, Of course, I'm not going to work in that factory, but where do I care or attend again about the implications of some of my decisions? I see that as part of right livelihood, right, the kinds of choices we make. Business in meat, business in intoxicants, and business in poison. Yeah, that's very specific. I think in general, I want to read this though. This is fun. This is a fun one. Wrong livelihood for contemplatives. This was wrong livelihood for monks and nuns. Well, for heaven's sake, they don't work in the sense that we understand it generally, right? But there was so much wild stuff going on then. Yeah, I didn't realize, but you read this list. Wrong livelihood for contemplatives: reading marks on the limbs, palmistry, reading omens and signs, interpreting celestial events like falling stars or comets, interpreting dreams, reading marks on the body, phrenology, reading marks on cloth gnawed by mice. What the heck? Offering fire oblations, oblations from a ladle, oblations from husks, rice powder, rice grains, ghee and oil, offering oblations from the mouth, offering blood sacrifices, making predictions based on the fingertips, geomancy, laying demons in a cemetery, placing spells on spirits, reciting house protection charms, snake charming, poison lore, scorpion lore, rat lore, bird lore, crow lore, fortune telling based on visions, giving protective charms, interpreting the calls of birds and animals. And then it says, the list goes on and on. What the heck? What are you talking about? The list goes on and on. Anyway, but so much of this, and this is, of course, one of the Buddha's big things, is that at the end of the day, whatever we do ritually is not going to be the thing that leads us to deeper freedom. It's all the magical thinking, all of it, and there was so much of it back then. If you just do this, if you take this, if you drink this, this elixir, that elixir, let me look at your palm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of fortune telling, in various forms going on back then. And that was considered to be wrong livelihood for contemplatives that presumably don't teach in this way, don't instruct in this way, don't advise in these ways, don't go see the astrologer down in the tea shop, that kind of thing. So that, that's traditionally, those are some of the traditional bits. But for us, I think, or at least the way we connect to it, it's really about just the larger positioning in the matrix. And how does it feel? Not again assigning to somebody else's rules about what is right and wrong. Hopefully bringing discernment, bringing mindfulness to it, giving having some sense of the implications, of our work, which is important, of our livelihood. I know I always had questions when I worked at an HMO, which I did for a decade, for 10 years, about the implications of that. What does it mean that I have to see so many patients because the company says so, that now I can't rebook the person I'm seeing today for another 6 weeks because I don't have room in my schedule, but I'm not serving that person if I can't see them for 6 weeks. So what about that? What about the gap that there's so much in mental health between administration and the demands coming down, the expectation demands versus the clinical work and relating to patients, to clients, to need, and the disparity there, and how do we work with that, and which organizations can we sign up for, et cetera, right? What is it right livelihood when we're working someplace and we're not being treated well or respected, but we like the work? What if we don't have choice, though? See, some of us have more choice than others in this society, too. How do we deal with that whole issue? It's so complicated. What about my brother worked at a job for 40 years. He never liked it for 1 minute. But he had 3 daughters, my 3 nieces, and he felt like it was the safe thing to do. And I would talk to him every few years. It's the safe thing, but you're miserable. What about that? Where does that livelihood question come in? Did he have some choice? He did have some choice. I talked to him about, but what is that like? And how do we make our decisions, in terms of, here's another great example of not seeing larger implications. There's a very powerful documentary and she was interviewed, Hitler's secretary, who was doing all this really good administrative stuff for him. And he would say, he was always really kind to me. I didn't kind of realize what was going on out there. They're very powerful. Sometimes we can be involved in something and have blinders on and not really want to attend to what the implications are, right? Have we been in that space? At the end of the day, right, livelihood, right, positioning in this way always still comes down to harm and not harm, to ahimsa. Is there some secondary or tertiary harm coming forward from this? From what I'm doing or from what I'm not doing? And what about our carbon footprint anyway? And what about how much do we really need? What is the balance there, right? All of these are really big questions, and it's simply bringing our discernment to those. How does it work, and not getting all self-righteous about whatever decisions we make. Also, that can be a sticky wicket there, because we're not in control of the whole universe. But how are we arranging, and how are we relating to our corner of the universe? How are we loving locally? How are we bringing right speech and right action into our workplace or not? Gossipy stuff in the workplace, that tends to happen a lot in the workplace. How's that going? Etc. So all these things interface, but they're really, the larger frame is how is it sitting with you? How you take a look, we take a look, Susan and I got rid of our car 3 years ago. We thought we could do without a car. Well, I don't think necessarily everybody should do that, but it felt like a really good decision for us to work with it and to get around in other ways, Yeah, or does it feel good to be making a bit smaller carbon footprint because we don't have a car? Sure it does. Feels right to us, felt right to us. But it's not about getting super or austere either. That can lead to all these sticky places, like overly rigid, overly tight, overly renunciate. It's always about the middle way and finding that right balance for us, So I know I'm kind of meandering here, but how do I would the investigation, I would say, is how do you relate to these, not just specifically what you were doing for work, but the interactive decisions that we're making in this, as we'll say, in this world on fire, how does it sit with you? Just how does it sit with you? Yeah. Are there any tweaks that you'd kind of like to make, but you haven't quite made yet? So much as just taking a closer look at what we do within and what we do without. And so I'll leave you with that for a beginning, some beginning overview reflections about this topic.